I was just a contract husband, paid to do a job, but the aloof CEO I married started treating me like her soulmate. When our contract was up and I brought up divorce, her face fell as she demanded, "Do you really want to leave me that badly?" She'd put food on my plate at a class reunion, calling me husband in front of everyone, and one night, she got drunk, dragged me on her bed, and refused to let go. I always figured she was just scared I'd run off with her money or was trying to get out of paying the remaining $2.5 million. But then came the car crash where she threw herself in harm's way to protect me. The day I left the hospital, I grabbed my suitcase, ready to head to City Hall and file the papers, but the next thing I knew, she had drugged me and chained me to the bed. When the lights flickered on, she was standing there in a sheer negligee, her eyes red, forcing me to remember the truth piece by piece. Turns out, I was the one she had been secretly in love with since we were kids. I thought it was a simple marriage contract. Once it expired, we would go our separate ways. I never expected her to suddenly cross the line. "Do you want to leave me that badly? I'm your wife. Since you're in such a hurry to leave, then..." The silver glint behind her made me flinch. It was only later that I learned it was the person she had been secretly in love with for years. At the dinner table, I looked at the cool and distant Olivia and spoke with a hint of anticipation. "Miss Sterling, we should find some time to go to City Hall." The chopsticks in her hand paused for a fraction of a second. Then, she resumed eating as if I hadn't said a thing. "Why would we go to City Hall?" I froze for a second. What did she mean by that? She didn't look like she was faking it. Maybe that old saying was true, that busy people have bad memories. I put down my fork and looked at Olivia seriously. "Ms. Sterling, the contract is about to expire. We need to find a time to finalize the divorce." She appeared completely composed, but I noticed her grip on her fork tighten ever so slightly. "There's still a few days left, aren't there?" Her voice was as flat and emotionless as ever. It was perfectly in character for her. The cold, aloof CEO. I rubbed my hands together, explaining with a bit of excitement. "I just figured you've been busy with work lately. Getting it done early would make it easier for you to schedule things." "We can talk about this later," she cut me off. Her tone was suddenly rushed. "I'm finished eating. I'm going back to my room." She stood up and walked out of the dining room without a backward glance. Watching her hurried retreat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then I shook my head and gave a self-deprecating laugh. No way. It was probably just some crisis at the office. I got up too, quickly cleared the table, and went back to my own room. I live on the first floor, while Olivia's bedroom is on the second. For the past 2 years, we've mostly stayed out of each other's way, living separate lives under the same roof. But for the past 6 months, Olivia had taken to wandering around near my bedroom door. I caught her doing it several times. Each time I found her, she seemed a little flustered, always claiming she was just thirsty and had gotten up for a glass of water. I never believed that excuse, of course, but I didn't dwell on it. I just chalked it up to the strange habits of the wealthy. Still, a thought would always pop into my head. Could she possibly like me? But I'd immediately squash that idea every time. Forget it. I'm self-aware enough to know better. A rich heiress falling for some poor guy? That kind of thing only happens in novels. It would never happen to me in real life. Not unless Olivia had completely lost her mind. And for what I could tell, she was perfectly sane. Her mind was sharp. Otherwise, she never would have gotten into the same university as me. We were classmates in college. I started my own business during our senior year. 3 years ago, just as the company was starting to see some success, my grandfather, who had raised me, was diagnosed with cancer. As his only living relative, I immediately sold the company I had worked so hard to build. Even with that, the money still wasn't enough to cover his medical bills. That's when Olivia found me. She offered me $5 million if I agreed to be her contract husband for 2 years. I have to admit, she really lived up to the title of CEO. The deal was so heavily skewed in my favor that I didn't even have to think about it. I accepted her terms on the spot. Back then, I was desperate. My grandfather's treatment was costing a fortune, and I needed every cent. That $5 million was a lifeline, even though, in the end, it wasn't enough to save him. 5 months after I signed the contract with her, my grandfather passed away, leaving me all alone. I sighed, thinking about the past again. So pathetic. I wiped a tear from my eye, pulled the comforter up over me, and tried to go to sleep. Just then, I heard a click and the sound of the doorknob turning. I froze for a second, then flicked on the lamp and walked to the door. When I pulled it open, Olivia was standing there. She looked like she'd just gotten out of the shower. Her fair, delicate skin had a rosy glow, and her elegant, oval face was flushed. Droplets of water still clung to the ends of her hair. She looked like a freshly bloomed lotus flower. Lucas, she began, glancing up at me for a second before quickly looking down again. The shower head in my bathroom is broken. Could I possibly use yours? She wasn't short, but she was still a good bit shorter than me. Looking down, the pale curve of her skin was like a snow-covered peak. Crap, I forgot to turn off my autofocus. I quickly looked away, asking in surprise, "Doesn't the guest room have a shower too?" She looked up, her expression as placid as ever. "The guest room hasn't been used in a long time. I'm not used to showering in there." "All right, fine, go ahead and use it," I said. "I'll wait in the living room." I stepped aside to let her pass into my room. "Thanks," she said, as concise as ever. I sat on the living room couch, pulled out my phone, and started scrolling through some videos. It was weird, though. Over the past 6 months, Olivia had been acting stranger and stranger. She used to just check in on me every few days at most. Now, she was coming directly into my room to use my shower. The whole thing felt off, and it made me wonder if maybe she had a crush on me. But every time I seriously considered it, it just felt completely unrealistic. The logic just wasn't there. So what other reason could there be? The video on my phone was playing some clickbait clip. The title read, "Woman seduces landlord to dodge rent, then accuses him of assault. He gets 3 years, she gets 3 years rent-free." I was speechless. The lengths people would go to avoid paying rent. For some reason, it made me think of my own situation. $5 million for 2 years. She paid me annually, which meant there was still $2.5 million left. She wasn't planning on skipping out on the final payment, was she? That would explain why she's been coming home from the office looking so grim lately. Maybe the company was having financial trouble. Maybe she didn't want to pay the rest. The more I mulled it over, the more plausible it seemed. Otherwise, knowing her personality, she would have already filed for divorce. She wasn't the type to procrastinate. A soft click from the doorway snapped me out of my thoughts. She stepped out of my room, wearing nothing but a bath towel. I quickly looked away. Given the circumstances, I was becoming more convinced that she was trying to seduce me, hoping I'd make a mistake so she could get out of paying me. My phone was still paused on that salacious video, and I hadn't been with anyone in a long time. The sight was a little overwhelming. I took a few deep breaths and spoke first, just to break the tension. "Ms. Sterling, has something been bothering you lately?" Her hands, which were toweling her hair, paused for a moment. Then she sat down on the couch, not far from me. "Why do you ask?" "I'm Fina." "Oh, I just thought you seemed a little down lately. I figured maybe something was wrong at the office." I subtly scooted a little farther away from her as I spoke, deliberately putting some space between us. For now, it seemed like the company was running fine. She probably wouldn't try to stiff me on the rest of the money. Still, I have to keep an eye on things. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed and full of energy. I threw a few shadow punches into the air and let out a yell. Yes, humming to myself, I got dressed and ready to head out. Today, I was planning to go check out some apartments in the suburbs. In just 3 days, our contract would be up. I didn't want to be around if she suddenly brought her real first love home one day, only to have them tell me, "You useless bum, get out." That would be mortifying. Better to move out early and keep my dignity. Though, come to think of it, I never heard her mention a first love. When we first signed the contract, she said her family was just pressuring her to get married, and she needed a contract husband as a shield. I shook my head, telling myself not to overthink it. What did it have to do with me anyway? She was just my employer. In 3 days, we'd go our separate ways. But the moment I opened my door, I saw Olivia, already dressed and ready for the day, sitting on the couch directly facing my room. Her eyes were fixed on me, filled with some complex emotion I couldn't decipher. I stared for a couple of seconds, then managed a weak smile. "Morning, Miss Sterling." Aren't you going into the office today? Olivia stood up, smoothing out her dress. No, I'm taking the day off. Are you busy? My stomach dropped. Huh? What did she mean by that? Was she trying to end the contract early? That would be fantastic. My mind raced through the possibilities. Ms. Sterling, did you need something? I tried my best to sound nonchalant. She walked slowly toward me, her eyes lingering on my face for a few seconds. Let's have breakfast first, she said. We can talk while we eat. I was completely baffled, but I followed her to the dining room anyway. The table was already covered with a fancy breakfast spread that made my stomach rumble. Who doesn't love a free meal? Rich people really go all out, even for breakfast. Olivia seemed to read my mind and sighed softly. Did you have plans for today? I put down my silverware and looked at her. I was going to look at some apartments, but it's no big deal. Where did you want to go, Miss Sterling? I can go with you. Her hand, which was raising a glass of milk, stopped mid-air. She paused for several seconds before finally speaking. Do you really want to move out that badly? I rushed to explain. I'm just worried that if I keep living here, I'll get in the way of your personal life later on. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. You're not in the way at all. You can move out then. There's no rush. I couldn't read her at all and felt like something was strange. This was only the second time she'd ever suggested going out together. The last time was for our wedding photos, when she decided my clothes were too plain and dragged me out shopping for a new suit. I had no idea why she suddenly wanted to go out this time. But as her employee, it was my job to fulfill her requests. After all, she was still signing my paychecks. After that, Olivia didn't touch her food again. In the end, I was the one who ate nearly everything on the table. I looked up and met her gaze, realizing she'd been watching me the whole time. I felt a little awkward and laughed nervously. Maybe I'm having a late growth spurt. My appetite's been huge lately. Olivia didn't respond. She just stood up quietly. Go get changed. We're going out. I hurried back to my room and threw on some casual clothes. When I came out, Olivia was already waiting for me by the front door. She was wearing a simple white dress, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She looked less aloof than usual, with an uncharacteristic softness about her. I drove, as usual. I expected her to get in the back seat like she always did, but instead, she opened the front passenger door and sat down. She was quiet during the drive, just staring silently at the passing cars. The good thing about driving a luxury car is that other drivers instinctively give you space. The drive was smooth, and we soon arrived at the most expensive mall in the city. I followed behind her as she walked straight toward the movie theater. I was a little confused. I thought we were here to shop. She must have sensed my confusion because she said quietly, I want to see a movie first. Go buy some popcorn. The boss had spoken, so I had to obey. All right, you can count on me. After I bought the popcorn and we found our seats, it hit me that I didn't even know what movie she'd picked. It was strange. I didn't think I'd ever seen her set foot in a movie theater. So what are we watching? I asked, munching on popcorn. It was better than just sitting there in awkward silence before the movie started. Ahomasi. Her voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. Ahomasi. I repeated the word in my head. Something felt off. I thought she had zero interest in movies like this. Asterisk before sunrise started. The lights slowly dimmed, and I couldn't see her expression anymore. I just knew that when she spoke, her voice sounded strange, like a character from one of those sad, young adult novels. I didn't think much of it. I knew the movie. It's about two strangers who meet by chance and spend an entire night talking about their dreams, beliefs, and philosophies. They develop a deep connection, but they still have to part ways in the morning. It's a perfect encapsulation of the so-called immediacy and purity of love. I scoffed internally. The immediacy of love, my foot. That kind of nonsense wouldn't even fool a dog. Do you believe in love at first sight? Olivia suddenly turned to me, her expression unreadable. A million questions popped into my head. We were nearly 2 hours into the movie, and I'd been half asleep for most of it. Where did that come from? Seriously? A person as stoic as you believing in love at first sight? Logically, shouldn't you be the type to stamp out any fleeting romance for the sake of your one true first love? But my boss was asking, so I answered honestly. I don't. That kind of thing only belongs in the movies. I don't either, she said. Let's go somewhere else. The credits started rolling on screen as the house lights came up like the morning sun. Olivia headed straight for the exit. I stared for a second. Then, seeing she was almost gone, I grabbed the popcorn and hurried after her. She walked with a purpose, every bit the powerful Ice Queen CEO. Once we were out of the theater, Olivia finally slowed down a little. She glanced at me over her shoulder. Let's get something to eat. I nodded eagerly and trotted to keep up with her. We went to a stylish steakhouse inside the mall. The lighting was soft and the background music was soothing. We sat across from each other, and Olivia expertly ordered a full-course meal for both of us while I just sat there, feeling a bit out of place. While we waited for our food, she fiddled with her silverware. Suddenly, she spoke. Lucas, sometimes I really envy characters in movies. They can be so direct with their feelings. I froze, unsure of how to respond. Luckily, the waiter chose that moment to bring our food to the table. I focused on my food, silently trying to make sense of her strange behavior and comment from today. Olivia, on the other hand, only picked at her meal, barely touching her plate. It was obvious her mind was elsewhere. After dinner, we wandered aimlessly through the mall. As we passed a jewelry store, Olivia stopped at the display window. She stared at the sparkling pieces, her gaze growing distant. I stood beside her, doing my best to be an unobtrusive background prop, not daring to interrupt her train of thought. After a long moment, she turned to me. Lucas, if one day someone suddenly realized that their life was incomplete without another person, what do you think they should do? My chest tightened. I felt like she was talking about something specific, but I didn't dare let my mind go there. I chose my words carefully. Well, I guess they'd have to look deep inside themselves first. Figure out just how important that other person really is to them. Olivia sighed softly and didn't press the subject. We walked a few more laps around the mall, but I could feel the atmosphere between us growing heavier with every step. After we got back from the mall yesterday, Olivia had a rare glass of wine. The moment we walked in the door, she started getting a little clingy. Is that a common side effect of alcohol? Naturally, I firmly but politely rebuffed her advances. Seriously, women who become CEOs aren't to be trifled with. I had no desire to get locked up at my age. Today was my college reunion. What was it? The 5-year anniversary dinner. It just so happened to be in the city, and I was free, so I figured I should at least make an appearance. I got to the Starlight Grand Hotel and took the elevator to the 6th floor. I could hear the loud chatter from the private dining room before I even got to the door. Lucas, I had barely reached the doorway when our old class president spotted me. He came over to greet me with the same warm smile he always had. I remember back in college, I was just an average guy from the countryside, as plain as they come. Other than being decent looking, I didn't have much else going for me. I was quiet in class, and I was studying economics of all things. My classmates were all from wealthy or influential families. I guess that very few of them would actually remember me. And sure enough, besides the class president, hardly anyone even glanced in my direction. Hey man, long time no see, I said, walking over and clapping him on the shoulder. You're looking good. Back in college, he'd always looked out for me, the quiet guy on the fringes. I'm glad you could make it, he said. Go find a seat. We have a special guest arriving soon. Sure thing. I found an empty seat in a corner and sat down. The great thing about corners is you can just focus on your food without being bothered. Just as I sat down, I overheard a few people next to me whispering. You think the class beauty, Olivia, will show? A guy in gold-rimmed glasses with an elitist air asked. I couldn't remember his name, but I recognized the slightly paunchy guy sitting across from him. His name was Jerry, and his family had some connections. She's a big-shot CEO now, way too busy for this, Jerry said, a hint of sourness in his voice. Looks like he was one of the guys who tried to date her back in school. I never paid much attention to that kind of gossip back then, so it was all just background noise to me. Sitting next to me was a sweet-faced girl named Jenny. I remembered her from our study group back in school. She was from New Orleans and had a really warm, friendly vibe. I remembered her well. She turned to me. Lucas, how's that company you started doing? I gave a faint smile. It went under a long time ago. I'm not cut out to be a boss. I'm better off just working for someone else. Jenny looked surprised. What? But I remember it was doing really well for a while. Before she could finish, the class president clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Everyone, look who's here." He gestured toward the door, welcoming someone into the room. Everyone's eyes followed his gesture. I looked up too, wondering to myself, it couldn't really be Olivia, could it? No way. She was always swamped with work. Other than dragging me on that bizarre shopping trip yesterday, I'd never seen her at any kind of social event. But when the person actually walked in, I still froze. Olivia? She actually came. She was wearing a simple white dress that nonetheless looked incredibly elegant on her. Her delicate features were accentuated by light makeup, and her hair was pulled back loosely. The moment she appeared, she captured the attention of nearly everyone in the room. She walked with an unhurried, elegant grace, as if she had her own personal spotlight. Jerry, who had been sulking just moments before, instantly lit up. He rushed over to greet her. "Olivia, you made it. I was starting to think you were going to stand us up." Olivia just gave a slight nod, polite but distant. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they finally landed on me, I saw a strange flicker in them. The class president then came over enthusiastically. "Olivia, come sit over here. We're so honored you could make it today." Olivia said a quiet, "Thank you," and then, to my surprise, walked straight toward my corner of the table. She looked at Jenny, who was sitting next to me, and said in a level voice, "Excuse me, would you mind if I sat here?" I glanced over, and she was pointing right at Jenny's seat. Wait a minute, Jenny needed a place to sit, too. Jenny seemed to get the message and immediately stood up, offering her the chair. "Of course, no problem. Please sit." Everyone around us looked shocked, and I was just as confused as they were. Olivia, who usually hated social gatherings, had not only come to the reunion, but was now sitting right next to me. This was completely out of character for her. She sat down beside me, leaned in close, and whispered, "Did you come here today just to see Jenny?" I was in the middle of taking a sip of water and nearly spit it all over the table. What was wrong with Olivia today? Why was she being so blunt? She was too close, so I instinctively shifted away. "Ms. Sterling, isn't that my personal business? I thought our agreement said we wouldn't meddle in each other's private lives." The agreement was that we wouldn't interfere with each other's lives after the contract ended. For Olivia to ask something like that now was very strange. The hand holding her glass tightened, and I could sense a shift in her mood. She said softly, "We're not divorced yet. As I see it, you should be putting me first." I was taken aback, my mind reeling. I had no idea why she was suddenly so concerned about this. Okay, Miss Sterling, you're right. I wasn't thinking." I quickly conceded in a low voice, hoping to avoid any more drama. The rest of the reunion was surprisingly normal, with none of the usual showing off or dramatic revelations. The only strange thing was Olivia's increasingly bizarre behavior. "Have some more of this," she said, placing a piece of meat on my plate. Then she shot a quick, meaningful glance at Jenny. It was subtle, but I caught it. Even someone as clueless as me could see it by now. She had to have a thing for me. Yep, one of the three great delusions of man. I think she likes me. A few of our table mates saw her serve me food, and their faces immediately lit up with gossip. Their eyes darted back and forth between Olivia and me. "Miss Sterling, I can't get it myself," I whispered to her. To my surprise, she leaned in close to my ear and murmured, "Isn't it perfectly normal for a wife to serve her husband?" Whoa, her words were so intimate they almost made my ears burn. Her voice had a sultry edge to it that made me instinctively pull back. When I turned to look at her, I saw an unmistakable glint of amusement in her eyes. By the time we got home, it was already 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I still couldn't figure out what had gotten into Olivia. At the reunion, she had played the part of the doting wife to perfection. And after a few drinks, her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes had taken on a hazy, alluring quality. I helped her back to her room. Seeing how drunk she was, I could only shake my head in resignation. Seriously, with so many other guys around, how could she let herself get that drunk? Did she really trust me that much? I took off her shoes and wiped her face with a damp cloth. I was just about to pull the covers over her when she suddenly grabbed my arm. I was leaning over, and her sudden pull sent me tumbling right on top of her. "Whoa, hey, you can't blame me for this," I whispered, even though she was probably out cold. You started it. Don't go blaming me for this in the morning. I found myself trying to justify my actions to someone who was completely passed out. But she clung to me like an octopus, holding me tight. Her cheek pressed against my neck, warm and slightly damp. A jolt went through me. This was heading into dangerous territory. She mumbled in her sleep, "Don't go. I need you." Hearing that, I let out a mental, "Oh." So she thought I was someone else. That made me feel a lot better. I gently pried her arms off of me, tucked her into bed, and quietly slipped out of the room, closing the door behind me. Standing in the living room, I stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the stars and let out a long sigh. Just one more day to get through. As soon as the money hit my account, I was out of here. Maybe I should go look at apartments again tomorrow, I thought, trying to psych myself up. As the morning sun filtered through the blinds and warmed my skin, I felt truly alive. Another beautiful day. In 2 more days, I could finally go out and start a real relationship of my own. Going through life without falling in love at least once would feel like a huge waste. I finished getting ready and glanced at the clock. It was 9:30. Normally, Olivia would already be at the office by now. All right, time to fly. I pulled open my door, feeling great, only to stop dead in my tracks. Olivia was still sitting in the living room, her eyes locked on me. "Miss Sterling, aren't you going to work today? It's not the weekend." I try to sound casual, but the thought of being free in 2 days probably put a little too much cheer in my voice. "You seem happy," she observed. She was wearing light makeup and was dressed more casually than usual. If it weren't for her perpetually cool expression, she might have even looked like the girl next door. "Yep, I was planning on looking at some apartments today. The weather's nice, good day to be out." I deftly changed the subject, not wanting my boss to read too much into it. "I'll go with you. I happen to know a few real estate agents." She stood up and announced this coolly. Hearing that, I froze. I couldn't let her come with me. What if her real, true love tracked me down to my new place and decided to come after me? I was about to protest, but she gave me no chance. She walked right over, grabbed my hand, and started dragging me toward the door. The amount of physical contact between us had definitely increased over the past few days. The whole situation felt wrong. I ended up driving. I steered the car steadily toward a new development in the suburbs. "You know, you don't have to be in such a hurry to move out," she said, breaking the silence. "I usually live alone. You wouldn't be bothering me." It was unusual for her to initiate conversation. She was looking out the window, but her voice carried clearly to my ears. "The contract is over. I have to move out," I said carefully. "It would be awkward if you brought someone home one day and I was still here." I chose my words carefully, afraid of saying the wrong thing and upsetting the powerful CEO next to me. "I don't have any other male friends," she stated flatly. Maybe because it was our last day, for the first time, I found myself looking at her as if she were a normal person, not just my boss. "Miss Sterling, is there someone you like, maybe from your time abroad?" I asked, just trying to fill the silence. "He's here, in this country," she said, slowly turning to look at me. Her gaze was intense. "Then why didn't you go find him? Back when we signed the contract." I was genuinely curious. Her excuse back then was that her family was pressuring her to get married, but after we signed the papers, she never once went to see them. She did, however, take my copy of the marriage license, and I never got it back. She looked at me and began, But before she could finish, a car ahead of us suddenly swerved, heading straight for us like a missile. It wasn't slowing down at all. My instinct screamed at me to swerve right. But in that split second, Olivia, as if possessed, lunged forward and grabbed my hands on the wheel. Her hand was ice cold and trembling slightly, but her grip was like a vice, forcing the wheel back to the left. The next second, a deafening crash exploded around us. It was like a thunderclap right next to my head, and my ears started ringing. Our car lurched violently, hit by the other vehicle like a charging bull. The car shook violently, and the world spun around me. It felt like I was being pulled into a vortex as my consciousness faded to black. The next time I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Thanks to the reinforced frame on Olivia's car, I only had minor cuts and bruises. I was lucky to be alive. The thought of Olivia made me sit up abruptly, In that last moment before the crash, she had put herself in the most dangerous spot. I couldn't quite describe the feeling that gave me. I got her room number from a nurse and rushed over, pushing the door open. She was lying quietly in bed, her face pale. The doctor said her injuries weren't too severe, but she would need a lot of rest. I stared at her pale, still beautiful face, and my mind was a chaotic mess of thoughts. If the car hadn't been reinforced, would she have been killed instantly? If I hadn't tried to make small talk, would this have happened at all? Our marriage was just a piece of paper, but she had been willing to die for me. My brain was a complete mess. I couldn't think of a single logical reason for what she did. It's funny how people are. The more you try to push something away, the less it seems to matter. But the moment you're about to lose it for good, you start to have second thoughts. That hesitation, I guess it's like how a teenage boy never forgets his first crush, or how an old man can get sentimental about a trusty old lighter. Well, Olivia had succeeded. She had permanently etched herself into my memory. Now, every time I get behind the wheel of a car, I'll think of her. This woman had given me the chance to live at the potential cost of her own life. I didn't know what to make of it, but thinking back on all her strange behavior over the last 6 months, I had to admit one thing. She had feelings for me, but I didn't want to be the other man in a relationship. I never felt like it was my place to ask before, and now that I finally felt I could, this had to happen. Whatever. I just have to take it one day at a time. At the very least, I'd take care of her until she was out of the hospital. I owed her that much. A few hours later, she slowly woke up. The first thing she did was stare at me, a look of profound relief on her face. Seeing her expression, I had to say something. Should I call your parents? And don't worry, I'll take care of you until you're discharged. She just shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I don't have any family. The doctor said you should rest and not talk too much. I tucked the blanket around her and got up to get her something to eat. 2 weeks flew by, and soon she was being discharged from the hospital. Back at the house, I started packing my things. I had to leave eventually. After living together for 2 years, we had at least developed some kind of bond. I'd asked her once why she hadn't just made a contract with the person she was actually in love with. She hadn't answered, just stared at me in silence. Of course, I wasn't arrogant enough to think I was the guy she was in love with. We barely spoke a word to each other in all 4 years of college. I didn't have much to pack, just a few sets of clothes and the old photo of me and my grandpa. That was the most valuable thing I owned. It was the most precious reminder of my time with him. I carefully packed everything in my suitcase. As I zipped it shut, I quietly closed the bedroom door. With that soft click, it felt like I was finally closing a chapter of my life that had been defined by a contract. I was ready to start a new and unknown journey. When I walked into the living room, she was sitting silently on the couch. Her silence seemed to make the air in the room feel heavy. Thanks to my diligent care over the past couple of weeks, she had mostly recovered. The sickly pallor of her skin had been replaced by a healthy, rosy glow. She was like the first green sprout after a long winter, subtle but full of life. I had assumed she would head straight back to the office after being discharged. Instead, she had silently come back to the house with me. Now, she slowly stood up, her eyes never leaving me. "Are you leaving?" she asked softly. "Look at you, you're sweating. Here, drink some water." I nodded, took the glass from her, and drank it all in one go. I had been running around so much lately that my throat was parched. I set the glass down, grabbed the handle of my suitcase, and started walking decisively toward the front door. "Let's go, Olivia," I said, glancing back at her. "City Hall should be open by now." She didn't answer, just stood there, staring at me in silence. But for some reason, the moment our eyes met, a wave of weakness washed over me, followed by an intense, dizzy spell. The world started to spin, like an out-of-control top. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was Olivia's strangely serene face, and the corners of her eyes, tinged with red, holding a glint of something that looked like obsessive madness. "I am screwed." That was my last thought before everything went dark. When I came to, my head was throbbing and my thoughts were sluggish and jumbled, as if my brain was full of cotton. It was pitch black, a thick, inky darkness that enveloped me completely. But I could feel that I was lying on a bed, and I could smell her familiar scent in the air. I tried to sit up, but the moment I moved my wrist, I heard a sharp, metallic clinking sound. It was the sound of chain. In the silent room, the noise was jarring, and it instantly snapped me out of my daze. Wait a minute, what was going on? Was I tied up? I pushed down the rising panic and confusion and called out her name. Olivia? Olivia! A sharp click broke the silence. A blinding light suddenly flooded the room, cutting through the darkness like a knife. Olivia walked in gracefully, but the way she looked today was nothing like her usual self. She was wearing a sheer, gossamer negligee that hinted at the pale, smooth skin underneath. Behind her, something glinted, a flash of silver that made my eyes water. Olivia, what is this? Are we playing some kind of new game? I forced a smile, hoping a joke might diffuse the strange, tense atmosphere. But she acted as if she hadn't heard me. She walked toward me slowly, one deliberate step at a time. When she was standing over me, her crimson lips parted. Her voice held a faint tremor and an undercurrent of long-suppressed resentment. Lucas, why are you always trying to leave me? We're husband and wife. She slowly raised a hand and caressed my face. The gesture was surprisingly gentle, but her words sent a cold sweat down my back. Wait a second. This was some kind of twisted, obsessive trope. Olivia, we're just in a contract marriage. If your first love finds out about this, what will he think? I spoke quickly, trying to stop her. Her hand was already sliding down toward my stomach. You still don't get it, she whispered, leaning down on my ear. The only one I've ever loved is you. Her voice was soft enough to melt stone, but her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke? Because, Olivia, it's not funny. A cold sweat broke out all over my body. My palms and the soles of my feet were damp. It's all right, she said. You'll feel how sincere I am soon enough. With that, she produced a small blue pill from somewhere and forced it into my mouth. I'm done for. After that, everything spiraled out of control. When it was all over, she lay quietly beside me, tracing circles on my chest with her fingertip. Do you believe me now? A lovely blush colored her cheeks, and her eyes were locked on me, unwilling to look away. I stared at the stark crimson stain on the sheets, my mind a complete blank. Why would you do this? From what I remember, we barely even know each other. I truly couldn't wrap my head around it. It was completely beyond my understanding. So you really have forgotten, she murmured, a hint of disappointment in her eyes. This wasn't some old, cliché movie plot, was it? The one where the poor kid saves the kidnapped heiress, and years later, she comes back to repay his kindness? I looked her in the eye and said my theory out loud. Do you know how I got this scar? She pulled back the blanket, revealing her nearly flawless body. It was only then that I noticed the scar on her shoulder. It looked like an old burn. My mind went completely blank. Bright Star Orphanage. Blossom. When she said the name, my mind buzzed. Holy crap. It really was one of those old, cliché plots. And I was one of the main characters. I really had spent some time at Bright Star Orphanage before my grandfather adopted me. Was this what they called fate? How did you recognize me? I turned my head to face the wall, trying to compose myself. I had you looked into, of course, she said. It sounds like a fairy tale, but I never forgot you. You know, if I had never seen the light, I could have learned to live in the darkness. She stared into the distance and slowly began to tell me her story. When my family finally found me and brought me home, they already had 2 other children. To them, one more daughter, the one who'd been lost and then found, didn't really matter. After I went back, they fed me and clothed me, but they never truly treated me like I was part of the family. They acted like I was bad luck, but it didn't matter. My grandmother was there, and she cared about me. That was enough. So, step by step, I made sure every single person who ever looked down on me paid for it. Now I have more money than I could ever need. So please, don't leave me, okay? By the time she finished, the rims of her eyes were turning red. I sighed internally. A blended family, parents who clearly favored their other kids. Her life was like a collection of every sad story trope. Then why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? I asked, looking at her in confusion. Because there's something wrong with me, she said, looking right at me, enunciating every word. Every time I saw you, I'd get this overwhelming urge. I wanted to lock you away where no one else could ever touch you. My therapist said that isn't what a healthy relationship looks like. So for the past few years, I've been getting help. It only started getting better about 2 years ago. That's when I started looking for you. It's just, when you were about to leave just now, I couldn't control it anymore. She looked down, like a small child waiting to be punished for misbehaving. Then, her head snapped back up. A bright glint appeared in her eyes. Lucas, I want to see your grandfather, secretly. I told him I was your wife. She giggled. He was so happy. He told me I had to take good care of you. She tilted her head, looking like a little kid expecting a pat on the head. You know, she said, her head dropping again as tears welled in her eyes. That day at the reunion, when I saw you talking to Jenny, I almost lost control right then and there. That's why I thought it would be better to make you a part of my madness. Otherwise, I knew you would leave me for good. I don't understand why you always thought I had someone else in my heart. The only one I've ever loved is you. You're my hero. You're my Lucas, and no one else's. Please don't leave me, okay? She threw her arms around me, holding on tight, and her tears fell onto my chest, each one feeling like a hot coal against my skin. I was completely stunned. I had no idea what to say. My entire plan had been to get through the contract and walk away clean. Now, my emotions were a tangled mess, my heart lurching like it was on a roller coaster. They say some connections are forged over lifetimes, that it takes more than just chance for two paths to cross so completely. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is what people mean when they talk about fate. This story, which began as a simple contract, ultimately holds up a mirror to the limiting narratives we create for ourselves, challenging us to see how often we, like Lucas, allow our own assumptions and past hurts to blind us to a love we deem impossible. It serves as a powerful, albeit painful, reminder that behind a guarded exterior like Olivia's often lies a silent history of pain and a devotion that, however flawed, is fighting for its survival. Ultimately, this journey is an invitation to look beyond the transactional contracts in our own lives, to have the courage to see the hidden scars in another, and to understand that true connection begins not in the search for perfection, but in the moment we choose to love someone because of their history, not in spite of it.